It's 108 degrees in the Texas desert, so hot that every breath burns your lungs and sweat turns to salt before it cools. And when James Stewart collapsed on the dusty set of Alamo Village, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth, his throat closing, Dean Martin had exactly 4 minutes to save his friend's life, before the anaphylactic shock turned into a heart attack. Bracketville, Texas, July 1968. Bandolero. The nearest major hospital was 140 miles away. The kind of isolation that worried insurance companies and kept producers awake at night. But James Stewart, aged 60, didn't hesitate when the offer came to shoot this Western with Dean Martin. What no one knew was that Stewart carried a secret allergy to rattlesnake venom, an allergy that would violently activate on the 4th day of filming. And Dean Martin, whom everyone thought was cool enough not to upset anyone, was about to become the only barrier between his friend and death. A lost snake, an undiscovered allergy, a desperate 45-mile race through hell that none of them would ever forget. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand who these men really were. James Stewart, Jimmy, 60 years old, July 1968, and racing against time. Leading roles wouldn't last forever. He had lost hearing in one ear during World War II, had chronic pain from old injuries, moved slower than before. But he refused to play old man roles. He accepted Bandolero because it was a physically demanding film, proof that James Stewart could still ride hard and shoot straight. What he didn't know was that his immune system had developed hypersensitivity during his service in the Pacific Theater. Exposure to tropical environments had primed his body to overreact to certain toxins, something that had lain dormant for decades. Then one exposure, and, if left untreated, death within minutes. Now, Dean Martin, Dino, 51 years old. Everyone saw the smooth operator, the Vegas showman who made everything look easy. But the truth was, Dean was obsessed with preparation. Behind that understated coolness was a man who scrutinized every detail, knew every crew member's name, constantly watched people. How they moved, the color of their skin in the heat, the subtle signs that something was wrong. He and Stewart were true friends. They had made 3 films together before, but there was something deeper. Both were war veterans. Stewart had flown bombing missions over Germany, returning home with the Distinguished Flying Cross and nightmares he never discussed. This shared understanding of survival, of carrying unspoken burdens, bound them together in a way Hollywood friendships rarely achieve. On July 8, 1968, the cast and crew arrive in Bracketville, Texas. Population 1,140. Alamo Village, a film set built in 1959 for John Wayne's The Alamo, now serves as their main location. The heat hits them immediately. It was 102 degrees at 3 p.m. There was no shade, just endless Texas scrubland and dust seeping into everything. Director Andrew McLaglen was waiting. "Gentlemen, welcome to hell. Water stations every 50 meters, medical tent ready. We're shooting early mornings and evenings to avoid the worst of the heat." Dean immediately spotted the animal trainers. A sign on a truck read, "Reptile Training." He walked over. "What's that?" Dutch, a man with leathery skin, grinned. "Authenticity. 6 Western rattlesnakes for the canyon scene. All their teeth removed. As safe as house cats." "Toothless doesn't mean harmless," Dean said quietly. Dutch shrugged. "Worst case, you get a gum scratch. The movie has to look real, Mr. Martin." Dean didn't like that, but he understood the logic. Westerns live and die by authenticity. Stewart arrived that evening, looking tired but excited. He and Dean shared a beer in the production trailer. The film told the story of 2 outlaw brothers. Stewart played D. Bishop, Dean played Mace, escaping from a posse, gunfights, chases, moral dilemmas. "You look good, Jimmy," Dean said, not quite believing it. Stewart looked pale and tense. "I feel awful," Stewart admitted, "but give me a day to adjust. I'll be fine." Dean decided to keep a close eye on him. Something wasn't right. Day 1, July 9th. Call time 6 a.m., temperature already 85 degrees and rising. Opening sequence, Stewart and Dean on horseback, galloping hard through the brush, the platoon closing in behind them. Simple action, multiple takes. By the third take, Stewart was breathing heavily. Not from exhaustion. His face was red, almost purple. Dean pulled him aside between takes. "You okay?" "I'm fine. It's just, the heat is hitting me faster than I expected." McLaglen called a lunch break at 11 a.m. when the temperature hit 105. Stewart sat in the shade, drank water, looking miserable. Dean sat down next to him. "Talk to me." Stewart hesitated. "Honestly, I can't get used to it like I used to. This heat constricts my chest. It's hard to breathe deeply." "Did you tell McLaglen?" "And shut down production on the first day?" "No, I'll endure it." Dean recognized this stubbornness, but his instincts screamed that Stewart couldn't endure this. Day 2, July 10th. The temperature exceeded 108 degrees by noon. The indoor scenes turned the set into an oven. No air conditioning, only fans pushing hot air around. Stewart was getting worse. His skin had turned gray. He was sweating more than the heat required. Dean noticed him scratching his arms repeatedly. When Stewart took off his costume shirt between takes, Dean saw them, hives. Small, red, raised bumps on his forearms and chest. "Jimmy, you're having an allergic reaction." Stewart looked down, surprised. "I didn't even notice. Maybe it's the detergent used on these costumes." Maybe, but Dean wasn't convinced. He pulled the set medic aside, a young man, clearly out of control. "Stewart is showing signs of an allergic reaction. Hives, breathing problems, color change. What antihistamines do you have?" The medic checked his bag. "Basic Benadryl, but if it's serious, it could be serious. Keep an eye on him. Make sure we have epinephrine on hand." "We do, but Mr. Martin, I've never had to use it before." Dean looked at him directly. "Then pray. We don't have to start now." That night Dean couldn't sleep. The hives, the breathing, Stewart deteriorating faster than heat exposure alone could explain. He got up at 2 a.m., walked to Stewart's trailer. Knocked lightly. "Jimmy, are you awake?" "I can't sleep either." Dean went inside. Stewart was sitting up, chest bare, hives covering his body. "God, Jimmy, we need a doctor." "In Bracketville at 2 a.m.? "I'll hold out until morning." "This isn't about holding out. Something's wrong." Stewart looked him in the eye. "I know, but if I leave now, they'll replace me. And his voice cracked. "I can't let it end like this. Too sick to finish a Western. Not at 60. Dean understood that pride, that fear of looking defeated. But he also understood something else. Sometimes pride kills you. "Okay," Dean said finally. "But tomorrow we're getting you checked out. If the doctor says it's over, it's over. Deal?" Stewart nodded. Deal. Neither of them slept. Day 3, July 11th. Call time 6 a.m., temperature 89 and rising fast. Today's big scene? Stewart and Dean are holed up in a rocky canyon, surrounded by the squad, making their last desperate stand. The location is 15 miles from base camp, accessible only by rough dirt roads. Remote, isolated, and Dutch was bringing his toothless rattlesnakes for authenticity. The snakes arrived in a secure container. 6 western rattlesnakes, each about 4 feet long. Dutch carried them confidently. "All right, folks, these beauties will be placed on various rocks throughout the canyon. It's too hot for them to move, but they'll look great on camera." McLaglen was excited. Perfect. Dean watched Dutch place the snakes on the marked rocks, marking each position with small flags. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dutch stopped. He looked into the container. That's weird." "What?" McLaglen asked. "One's missing. There should be 6. I'm counting 5. The set fell very quiet. "You lost a snake," Dean said sharply. "It must have gotten out somewhere between here and the main camp. Probably crawled into the desert. It can't hurt anyone. It's toothless, remember?" Dean's jaw tightened. "But it could still bite. It could carry bacteria." "Technically, yes, but..." Shut up, Dean said to McLaglen. Right now. We're not shooting here until that snake is found. McLaglen looked torn. Dean, we're losing light. I don't care about the schedule. A 4-foot rattlesnake is loose around here, and 40 people are walking around. Someone's going to get hurt. They searched for 3 hours. No snake. It had vanished into the desert. Finally, McLaglen made the call. All right, we've lost the day. We'll reschedule tomorrow at a different location. On the way back, Stewart sat next to Dean. The hives were worse, much worse. They covered his neck, creeping up toward his face. His breathing was labored, wheezy. Jimmy, we're going to the doctor. Now. They drove to Bracketville's only clinic. Dr. Hernandez, a man in his 60s who had probably seen everything rural Texas could throw at him, carefully examined Stewart. Mr. Stewart, you're having a significant allergic reaction. Blood pressure is high, breathing is compromised, the hives are spreading. I'm going to give you corticosteroids and a strong antihistamine. But I need to know, have you been exposed to anything unusual in the last few days? Stewart thought. Just the heat, the dust, normal film set stuff. Dean interjected. There were snakes on set today, rattlesnakes. He didn't touch them, but he was close. Dr. Hernandez's expression changed. How close? Maybe 20 feet, an hour or two. The doctor's face fell. Mr. Stewart, did you serve in the Pacific Theater during the war? Stewart blinked. Yes. Mostly the Philippines. Why? There's a documented phenomenon where tropical venom exposure in Pacific veterans creates long-term immune sensitivity. Your body produces antibodies, but sometimes these antibodies overreact when exposed to similar poisons decades later. Even indirect exposure, being near snakes, breathing air with trace amounts of their scent, can trigger reactions. So, I'm allergic to rattlesnakes. Your body reacts as if you've been poisoned, even though you haven't been bitten. This is serious, Mr. Stewart. If you are actually bitten, even by a toothless snake, the bacterial infection combined with your immune response could trigger anaphylactic shock. Stewart was silent. Doctor, I have a movie to finish. Mr. Stewart, if that missing snake bites you, your throat will close, your blood pressure will drop, and if someone doesn't give you epinephrine immediately, you'll have a heart attack. Dean's blood ran cold. How immediately? 4 to 6 minutes, perhaps less, given your sensitized state. 4 to 6 minutes. In the middle of the Texas desert, 15 miles from base camp, 140 miles from a real hospital. Stewart was silent on the way back. Dean knew what he was thinking. Career or life? Pride or survival? I'm not quitting, Stewart said finally. Jimmy, I'm not giving up. But I'll be careful. And you'll watch my back. Dean wanted to argue, but he understood. This was Stewart's decision to make. All Dean could do was be ready. If anything feels wrong, anything, tell me immediately. During the shoot, not afterward. Got it? Yes, I got it. Day 4 dawned merciless. The temperature was already 91 degrees at 7 a.m. The call sheet said a different canyon location, a place without Dutch's snakes. A fresh start, safe, but the missing snake had to be somewhere. And snakes show up in the most unexpected places. The new location was spectacular. Red rock formations, natural shade, authentic western scenery. McLaglen was excited. This is even better. Let's work some magic. Scene. Stewart and Dean are behind a rock, firing at the squad. Practical effects, blinds, explosives, blasts simulating gunfire. Dangerous, but routine. Dean watched Stewart closely. The hives were visible on his neck, but he'd taken heavy antihistamines that morning. His breathing looked good. Are you okay? As okay as I can be. First take, smooth. Second, perfect. Fourth take, everyone on the field, that magical synchronization where the film comes to life. Fifth take, Stewart crouched behind the rock, Dean beside him. At action, they both sprang up, firing their fake guns. The stunt crew triggered the explosives. Smoke, noise, controlled chaos. Stewart fell behind the rock. He reached down to brace himself against it. He placed his hand directly on the rattlesnake. It had been there all along, curled up in the shade behind the rock, seeking coolness. When Stewart's hand came down on it, the snake defended itself. Even toothless rattlesnakes have back teeth. Even toothless, those teeth carry bacteria, causing holes. And even toothless, the bite triggers a major immune response in someone already sensitized. Stewart pulled back. "Ah, something bit me." His eyes widened. He looked at his hand. 2 puncture marks, swelling, reddening. He looked at Dean. Snake. Time slowed. Dean saw Stewart's throat closing, the panic in his eyes, his color draining. 4 to 6 minutes. The doctor had said that. "Medic!" Dean yelled. "Medic now!" But the medic was at base camp, 15 miles away, a 20-minute drive on bad roads. Stewart didn't have 20 minutes, maybe 5. Dean caught Stewart as his legs buckled. "Stay with me, Jimmy." Stewart's lips were turning blue, gasping for air, his airway constricting. Anaphylaxis doesn't wait. The set descended into chaos. McLaglen was shouting orders. Crew members were running to vehicles. None of it mattered. None of them could save Stewart in time. Dean made a decision. He scooped Stewart up and ran to the nearest vehicle, a production jeep. He laid him in the back seat, saw foam gathering at his mouth, his eyes rolling back. "Where's the epinephrine?" An assistant grabbed the kit and ran. "It's here, but how?" Dean snatched it. His hands were steady. He'd seen EpiPen use on USO tours. He pulled out the injector, placed it on Stewart's thigh, and pushed through the costume fabric. He held it for 3 seconds. "Come on, Jimmy." Nothing. Stewart's breath was barely there, a wet rattle like drowning. Dean started the jeep. "I'm taking him to the hospital. Radio it in." "Dean, you can't drive this. It's 140 miles. Watch me." He shot out of that canyon like hell was chasing him. Death was in the back seat, trying to steal his friend. The roads were terrible, unpaved, rutted, grooved sections. Dean pressed hard, sometimes hitting 60 on the straights, slowing down on the turns to avoid flipping. Behind him, Stewart was gasping for breath. The epinephrine might have bought him 10 minutes, slowing the reaction but not stopping it. His throat was still closing. He needed real medical intervention, IV corticosteroids, airway management. Dean kept looking back. "Jimmy, stay awake. Can you hear me? You can't leave me like this." Stewart's eyes fluttered. He was trying, but anaphylaxis doesn't care. Within 20 minutes, Dean's hands had turned white, his jaw clenched. The nearest town was Uvalde, 40 miles away, a small hospital, an emergency room. He could make it. Stewart's breathing changed. It became shallow, weak. The epinephrine was wearing off. "No, no, no," Dean muttered. He pressed harder. 70 on the dirt road. Suicide. He didn't care. Within 30 minutes, Stewart stopped breathing. Dean nearly crashed. He slammed on the brakes, skidded to a stop, threw himself into the back seat. Stewart's lips were blue, his chest motionless. Heart attack. Dean had maybe 2 minutes before brain damage set in. Maybe less. He tilted Stewart's head back, checked the airway. Completely blocked. Swollen. Without an airway, CPR was useless. He needed to perform an emergency cricothyrotomy, something he'd seen once during the war. Dean Martin wasn't hoping anymore. He was doing it. He took the smallest knife from the medical kit, a scalpel for splinters. His hands were steady. Someone else's hands. The version of himself that pushed fear aside and acted. He found Stewart's cricothyroid membrane by touch, the soft spot between the cartilages. He made a horizontal cut, not deep, just through the membrane. Blood spurted out. He took an empty pen from the torpedo eye, a cheap ballpoint pen, snapped off the ends, and inserted it into the cut. Air whistled through. Stewart's chest rose, fell, rose again. Dean started CPR. 30 compressions, 2 breaths into the makeshift airway. His world narrowed to the rhythm. Don't think, just move, compress, breathe. 1 minute, 2, 3. Stewart coughed, took a breath. Air passed through the pen tube. His eyes fluttered, confused, scared but alert. "There it is," Dean gasped. "Stay with me." He returned to the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel, watching Stewart. He held the pen tube. Stewart was breathing from it, wheezing, but breathing. Dean drove like he'd never driven before. 45 minutes after leaving the canyon, he entered the Uvalde Community Hospital parking lot, honking the horn, calling for help before the Jeep even stopped. Medical staff poured out. They saw Stewart, the improvised cricothyrotomy, Dean covered in blood. They moved, professional, fast. The stretcher, running inside, Dean running alongside them until they passed through the doors marked "Surgery, no entry." A nurse stopped him. "Sir, you need to stay here." Dean stood there, his hands now shaking, the adrenaline fading, Stewart's blood drying on his shirt and hands. He had never felt so helpless in his life. 2 hours later, a surgeon emerged. "Mr. Martin, your friend will live. That cricothyrotomy. I don't know where you learned it, but it saved his life. 3 more minutes, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Dean's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the floor, buried his head in his hands, and for the first time in 20 years, Dean Martin cried in front of strangers. James Stewart stayed at Uvalde Community Hospital for 5 days. They performed a surgical tracheotomy to change Dean's field procedure, pumped steroids into him, and kept him on sedation while his immune system calmed down. But he lived, because Dean Martin refused to accept his friend was dead, because Dean drove 45 miles through hell, because Dean performed the medical intervention he shouldn't have. Bandolero, shut down for 2 weeks. When they restarted, it was with a strict no-creepers policy, new safety protocols, and a real emergency doctor on standby. Stewart returned to finish the scenes, but he was different, quieter, more careful. The man, desperate to prove himself, had faced his mortality. The film wrapped in August 1968 and was released in June 1969. It was a moderately successful, respectable film. Critics praised the chemistry between Stewart and Martin. But the real story never made it to the press. The studio buried it, not wanting bad publicity. For decades, very few people knew about the snake, the reaction, the desperate drive, the cricothyrotomy with a ballpoint pen. James Stewart knew. He never forgot. In 1975, at Dean's birthday party, Stewart stood up to give a toast. At first he was quiet, emotional. Then, 7 years ago, I died. Literally died. And Dean Martin brought me back. Not just because he knew first aid, but because he refused to let me go. He drove like a madman across the desert, cut my throat with a pocket knife, breathed for me when I couldn't breathe. This isn't friendship. This is love. This is what it looks like when you love someone enough to fight death for them. Dean, uncomfortable, tried to deflect. "Jimmy, you're embarrassing me." "Good," said Stewart. "You deserve to be embarrassed into admitting how extraordinary you are. Think about it. How many people have someone who would go through hell for 45 miles? Someone who would literally operate with a ballpoint pen to save your life? That's not every day. That's once in a lifetime. James Stewart died in 1997. Dean Martin died the next year. But between 1968 and 1997, Stewart didn't make another movie with live snakes. He didn't take on a role that would push him to the limits of his health. He had learned something in that Texas canyon, something Dean had been trying to teach him from the beginning. Survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about knowing when you need help and letting the people who love you intervene. Who is your Dean Martin? The person who would slit your throat with a pen to keep you breathing? One more story before I go. Later in his life, someone asked Dean what the craziest thing he ever did on a movie set was. He smiled, fell silent, and said, "Bracketville, Texas, 1968. 45 miles in 45 minutes with my best friend dying in the back seat. That's when I understood what real courage is. It's not about being fearless, it's about being absolutely terrified and doing it anyway." Thanks for watching. Now go out there and be someone's